And hello to you all. It is after hours, and Mr. George is having a bit of an issue with his computer, so he will be joining us in just a moment. I have a little bit of a headache, but at least I don't have cat scratch fever. It's good to see you all. I hope you all can hear me just fine. We should be coming through. I have some extra screens open today because we are going to be talking about this Iranian strike. And let's see, Seaver's mentioning entropy, and we will have it up here. Thank you, my dear friend. Make sure that that is working. There will be one moment of sound. No, looks like I got ahead of it. Good deal. So it should be running right now. And it is after hours. Computer malfunction over with Jared George. A little bit of a headache here. Nobody has cat scratch fever. And that's all that matters. We're going to have Semiogogue join us briefly, I think for a little bit later. We'll be here about a total of an hour with you all. If you have any questions or you have info to feed us about what's going on around the world and anything else you all want to talk about, because of course this is not the only what's going on with Iran and the United States. This is one thing I will tell you all. If you can everybody hear me okay? I don't know if anybody can hear me. Over here it says that everything is fine, but I don't know. Yeah, it says everything's fine over here. Oh, okay. Mandy is here. So she got a bit of a headache too. Well, as long as you don't have cat scratch fever, you're good. So the one thing I do want to mention right off the bat is hello, Blue. Great to see you. Stressed out, I guess you're saying you are. Porky, Greek, JK160, J Hart. Great to see you all. Daniel. The heroes always answer the summons. Farm Master. So this is what I want to say. It's very important that you do this in your speech, because that's what we do here in Going Free. We have we're writing the pages to our book. We are writing our story. And in our story, what the United States does or what the UK does or what Germany does is not us. Don't say we killed the Iranian general. We did it. And now Iran has hit us. We have nothing to do with it. White people have nothing whatsoever to do with what this government in the United States or what is happening, or white people's interests, what's happening in the government in the UK or any of these other countries. The entirety of the West is dominated by anti-whites. And so our interests and what we want in the world, what's good for us, what'll be good for our little white babies, is utterly immaterial. Of course, tonight we have just a bit of information that I have had. I haven't had a lot of time, as I've been quite busy with other things, to look into what's going on. Roar, hello to you. Toppy, hello to you over there on the gardening channel. Is that, of course, days ago, the United States, I guess, murdered an Iranian general, and by firing missiles from one of these Reaper drones, as I understand. And who knows if we have all of the information or if that's exactly what it was. But kills this guy, and he's the general, the leader of their Revolutionary Guard, or whatever it's called. Is that what it is called? The elite soldiers. And so they fire some missiles into a base or two in Iraq. They had to fire those missiles over some other bases between Iran, where they were launched, and in Iraq, where those missiles landed. The base or bases, it houses American troops. How many? I don't know. But I can tell you about bases, military bases. They're not like your house. So don't think about a base in the sense of it's your house. And so if a missile hits a base, that means it's absolutely killed people. That means it's absolutely destroyed structures. None of that can be true. A base can be enormous. There can be a great many square miles that have nothing on them. So where those missiles landed is yet to be known. I haven't seen any reports about whether or not it actually struck structures, or it looks like Jared George has just entered the backstage. I'll bring him right forward. I don't know if it hit any structures or if it killed any people, but if you all have any information on that, we would be interested in hearing. I do have an earpiece, by the way, so that I can be collecting news while we are live. And if anything else comes up, I will happily share it with you all. And if you all have anything to share, please happily share it with us. But the big point that I want to make right up front is if you are an American, you did not just get hit by Iran. You did not launch missiles that killed this Iranian general. You did none of this. This doesn't benefit you. You are not responsible for it. Now, for all the people out there who will say, well, yeah, obviously, it's not just me. When you're saying, and this is what I try to explain to conservatives, these conservative losers on the Hill over the years, when you're saying we and us, it makes it impossible to think about a solution to the problem in front of you. So when you are a conservative and you're in government and you're saying things like, why do we just keep something anti-white, aborting babies, letting criminals go? Why do we just keep doing these things? You can't answer those questions because you are not the one doing it. You can't come up with anything sane. You have to ask the right questions to get the right answers. And it amazes me. I knew people on the Hill with several doctorates, people with several master's degrees, and they couldn't wrap their book-laden heads around it. So don't make this mistake. Don't say we. Whether if you were in the UK and the UK is sending ships, I understand, to the Gulf, it's not we're sending ships to the Gulf. No, it's the anti-whites who control the government of the UK are sending ships to the Gulf. And what's going to end up happening is our brothers and sisters are going to end up dying to the tune of how many. They're going to end up being maimed to the tune of however many that is going to be for the benefit of other groups. Once again, and this is Donald Trump, who was elected, and if you all were here, by the way, was elected so that this garbage wouldn't continue. It was the two big things were close the border down because we want to remain a Western country and stop the wars. Those were the two main things. And he's not doing either. So, but what is he doing? If you were with me, I briefly said the other day about this is not I totally reject that this is a casus belli and they're going to use this for war. They could use anything to start war. They don't care. They went to war in Iraq with no excuse whatsoever. So that's not what's happening here. What's happening is that Donald Trump brilliantly, although I detest him and what he's doing, it's a brilliant move. He is the Jewish community is divided. Some of them want this country that they have affinity for to absolutely dominate the entire Middle East. Some of them want something a little less than that. And in our countries across the West, they break into a dichotomy of those who want more anti-white policies and care a little bit less. Those are the ones who are less concerned about how much hegemony this other country has. And then those who are more concerned with the hegemony that the little country has, and they can put off the anti-whiteism as stringently or as profoundly as their brothers and sisters would like to have it inflicted. Not that they're white positive in any way. What Trump has done is, of that group that vehemently opposes him for saying anything that would undermine or inhibit their ability to inflict anti-whiteism. What he's done to that group is that he has paralyzed, neutralized a certain percentage of them. How much, who knows? But he has done so by attacking these people that they consider just the absolute enemy par excellence of the country that they have affinity for. So even though they say, well, he's a piece of garbage because he has said America first, and that gets people excited, and they then oppose things. So this white population opposes things that we would like to do here, and we hate Trump for that. Yet he's still taking out that country that we really despise and we feel is a threat. So there is a percentage of that group that is going to be neutralized, and they're not going to use their talent. They're not going to use their money. They're not going to use their resources and their connections against him in the coming election. It couldn't be any more obvious for those with eyes to see exactly what's happening. So let me grab Mr. George and bring him forward. And there we go. The great Jared George has joined us, and you're now unmuted.
Hello.
You're running well?
Yeah, I didn't want anyone to be worried. Sometimes internet is an issue in the secret base. Just before I was going on air, I couldn't even get where I needed to get to access the link to be on this. So
Damn.
My apologies for being a few minutes late. I was catching the last few minutes of what you were saying there. And hello, everyone. I believe Oliver of Semiogogue will be joining us in about 10 minutes. So that'll be good. He knows a lot about that area of the world. So, yeah, I agree and had similar observations as you did from what I heard so far. I was just going to briefly say, and I don't know if you directly said this before I was signed in, maybe I didn't hear it, but we really always have to remember this fundamental of avoiding these dichotomies that it's so easy for the media and even social interaction on social media to kind of funnel you into. Don't let people make you feel that because you're opposed to what's going on right now, then they try to back you into a corner and say, oh, well, you must be a supporter of regimes in the Middle East, or you must be sympathetic to Islam, or any kind of argument like that. As we speak about all the time here, your locus, your center of gravity is what is good for our people. And so that can sometimes take nuanced approaches, and sometimes you can be against A, B, and C. It doesn't mean that just because you're against A, you're for B and C. So please avoid those false dichotomies, being funneled into those. That would just be a very simple thing that I'd have to say for starters. But you probably either indirectly or directly already addressed that, I would imagine.
Not specifically, no. I was talking more about the sharing, like the royal we, and sharing the blame, sharing the responsibility, sharing the hurt with Miss Jess Horse saying hello to you, my dear lady. The great Poseidon is here. Jay Esom is here. Great to see you both. Just that we shouldn't own the actions of the anti-whites, nor should we feel that we have been harmed by those who retaliate on the anti-whites. This launching of these missiles, and what I was saying before you were here is, first of all, these bases, military bases, can be enormous.
Yeah,
it could have been an absolutely symbolic thing that the Iranians did. They launched these missiles beyond bases that were closer in Iraq, bases that also house American soldiers. So they flew the missiles over the heads. Why? I'm curious. Could it be that this base or bases that they hit have some of these, hundreds of square miles with nothing on them, and they've just been taken over by the government and declared part of the military base, so they could do activities, exercises, etc. out there? And did these missiles land in these desolate areas where there are no people, there are no buildings, or there are just buildings that are used for practicing city siege and warfare and things like that? Nobody's living there, and so they've just destroyed nothing, these fake buildings that no one lives in. Could it be that? And just totally symbolic? Who knows? We're not going to get the truth out of the United States government. We're definitely not going to get the truth also out of the Iranian government. They're going to be saying, because I guess this is another thing that folks need to understand about and I said it on Sunday about the Middle East. They could be arguing over the price of water. Two politicians could be arguing over the price, or leaders could be arguing over the price of water, and they'll be talking about how blood will run through the streets if the other politician. This is just this grandiloquent, violent, hyperbolic speech in the histrionics that they engage in. That's just normal for their speech. So their big warnings, their big threats, they need to be seen in the light of how they speak.
More people would understand that if our civilization was more realistic about differences between people, and we weren't under this siren song that everyone's the same, because then more people in the population would have that frame. Well, when we hear this from another culture, they're not necessarily like us. They don't necessarily use language the same way. So maybe it doesn't mean quite the same thing. It's a different signal, even though the verbiage might technically be the same.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the many, and maybe one that we don't think about as much, side effects of the kind of world that we live in now, the frame, the veil that's descended upon most of Western civilization in the past decades.
Yeah, it really is.
I know what you mean about the we. That's an important thing too. I mean, there's a lot in the wake of this that we can discuss and will come up in maybe subsequent streams, especially for Americans, about hopefully it's going to shake some people and make them realize what their real identity is and where their loyalties are. But Morgoth did an interesting video I was just watching before we went on about heroes and how there was this angle where, and I was kind of thinking about this too, but it hadn't really formulated fully consciously until I listened to the Morgoth video. And it was based on Iranian television, and of course they have their own angles and they're advocating for their own interests. But I think the point still stands. This Soleimani guy, and most of us don't know much about him. I don't know. I didn't hear about him until the last few days. I think that's probably true for most of us. And there's different reports as to, to what degree he was an ally to the United States and to what degree we, and I don't mean we, meaning the occupied government, but people who watch this show or in this community and generally think like we do, to what degree we would consider him a bad actor or not. Even putting that aside for a second, he was this folk hero to those people in Iran, and that we don't have an equivalent here. The thought experiment was, what would be a reciprocal action if they were to take out one person here in the United States? And we don't have someone like that. And that speaks to a lot right there about how there is no, and we know this, people like us know this, but this situation really puts a point on it, that we don't have a cohesive society, and we don't have this traditional order, and we don't have these kind of people where it all focuses on, where most of us would be horrified if a certain person was assassinated and taken out, and is a rallying point and represents the spirit and the hopes of a unified people.
Yeah, precisely. That we're not. Well, if they wanted to try to unite us around something, first of all, you can't unite a people that is so heterogeneous as the population of the United States. You can only rally this segment around these folks, or this person, or this different segment over here with this other leader, whatever it is. You can't. And if they were to try to give somebody to us as a folk hero, it's certainly not going to be a white man. I mean, could you imagine what they would put, the anti-whites would put forward for us to supposedly rally around? And then you would, of course, know, you would see all these CivNat losers come out who would want to endorse no matter what it was that they put in front of us. I'm sure the more melanin that he had, the more they would drop to their knees in glee to worship the military hero that the anti-white regime would put in front of us.
I mean, it really puts a point on it. Yeah,
it really does put it is an important point that you make there, that we don't have.
It was really Morgoth who articulated it. Yeah, and my hat's off to him. And he was trying to be courteous and say it wasn't an attack, and I certainly wasn't offended. And he said the same would hold true for Britain as well, his native Britain, England, and most of the West again. The other thing is, I think we all know this, but I mean, I see the MAGA people on Twitter just doubling down, and they just can't cast a critical eye at Trump. Maybe I'm hoping that we can use this kind of situation to wake more people up, because how much more apparent can it be if you just do it in a cold, in a sober, detached way? If there were space aliens, if there were little green men from Mars observing with that distance, with that detachment, with no emotional attachment, no investment in anything, just the proceedings of some of the things going on, life on Earth. It's 2020. We were talking about 2020. It's getting off to quite a start, huh? And you
Yeah.
saw this subpart of the human species who were all kind of together in these similar tribes in these similar areas throughout history. You could kind of see the timeline if you were watching over thousands of years. You can see that they all had similar traits and characteristics and cultures, and they overlapped. And then part of them went off at one point to this, crossed an ocean and went to this huge continent called America. And eventually they founded a nation that represented them on it, right? And then flash forward to where we are now, where there are other peoples coming up through the border to our south, right? And we're expending all of our energy, all of the military aspect of our civilization, all of our military powers, the parts that represent your defense, and that base part of life where it's either kill or be killed. You always have to have some kind of element in either in your personal life or even in the civilization that's taking care of that. That's taking care of the boundaries, right? Protecting the boundaries. There's a porous southern border, and there's all kinds of fracture inside, and yet all of the resources are going over well across that ocean again to another part of the world. What is it, 8,000 miles away? That is getting entangled, and there's this little nation there that is pulling our interests, and there are people there that are in our spheres of influence, in our government, in our media. You would say, well, this is an occupied nation.
Precisely. Yeah, using the might of this country for the interests of other peoples is certainly a sign. No matter in allied situations, you come to the aid of the ally who is being attacked. So another country is invading them, and you come to their aid, to their defense. That's what you do for an ally. You go fight everyone the ally orders you to when you are a slave or servant, and that other entity is a master. This is not the behavior of allies. So it's just really paper thin, tenuous excuses to carry out what we know is acts that benefit others and clearly do. The other thing that is important to mention, and I see Oliver's just showed up, so I'll bring him in. Two things that come to mind is that how many times were we told the pretext? I mean, just God, people, look back over all the lies. Look back over all of the lies. How many times were we told that this was, we were going to be spreading democracy, and Iraq was going to be this? And remember, Iraq was not a fundamentalist Islamic nation. The people there, I mean, we're not going to rehash all of these things because everybody's going to have different opinions and different recollections. But I mean, you had, what was the guy's name? Something like Tariq Aziz. He was a Christian. He was number two. He was Saddam's right-hand man. Saddam didn't allow all of these fanatical Islamic traditions and as soon as he was gone, and the reason why was because you had to worship Saddam. Okay, so then you had to, and so what? Let them do whatever they're going to do over there. So now you sweep all that away, these anti-whites using our treasure, our dollars, our hard-earned, our sweat, our blood, our genius, everything of us, trillions spent, because democracy was going to be visited upon them, and women were going to, by the way, women were already going to university in Iraq before the U.S. invaded, but all of this was going to be visited upon them. It was going to be this wonderful place. And what ended up happening, of course, millions of children died, and country in ruins, and pornography dumped into the country daily. Wonder where that's coming from. And by the way, it's not Arab women in the pornography. It's all white women. It's all the women, our daughters and mothers and sisters, that are being shown in these pornographic scenes with these Arabs, that's being dumped into their countries. And what has happened? Democracy hasn't worked. Things are falling apart. The leaders that are there hate the United States, and they say, we want you to get out trillions and trillions. And that is not, you can't even come close. A human being can't come close to comprehending that sum of money. What could have been done with it? So the opportunity cost, what could we have been doing with that? What could we have done with the people, all the people that died there, all of our brothers and sisters that died there, or were so ruined from warfare that they can't function anymore? What could they have done had they been home? Who maybe they would have fathered or mothered when they had been home? Maybe the person who would have cured the disease that you're going to get when you hit 55 years of age, or whatever it is, or the doctor that would have treated the mother you love. Who knows? It's impossible to calculate the damage that is inflicted on us as a people, and therefore on us as individuals, because these interests, other than our own, anti-white interests, have dominate our leadership. They dominate the government here. It's not your government. It's not my government. And they then go out and act in the world in a way that benefits them, benefits these anti-white objectives and interests at our expense. So what was the other thing I wanted to say? The democracies, the trillions. We had Mrs. Jess Horst. She chimed in saying she has military family, and she says that from her understanding, the base is in the middle of nowhere, the one that they hit, and it's enormous. As I was saying at the beginning of the show, that these missiles flew over bases that have American troops in them to land in a base or bases where there are American troops. So what was it about those base or bases? As I said, sometimes military bases have hundreds of square miles that are nothing. They're just used for exercises. So the whole thing could be symbolic. Of course, Iran, their leadership is going to say, we've struck the great devil, a deadly blow, and they're going to blow it up in their florid hyperbolic language. And of course, the United States is going to act like, well, this has been grievous. We've really been injured. Even if these missiles landed in the middle of nowhere on this base and no one got hurt, maybe an armadillo, or I don't know if they have those there. But whatever it is, we hope that none of our brothers and sisters of Western kind were harmed in any way in these missile strikes, because if they were, it's not Iran bears, of course, the people who launched the missiles bear some of the blame, but the majority of the blame should be focused on the anti-whites who dominate the government of the United States and the other governments of the West, and who are behind these sorts of strikes for the benefit of other peoples. So let me go ahead. And I think, what were we going to say, Jared? I think somebody else had a comment that I wanted to.
Well, first, please, everybody, stay cool. Keep your head calm. You're going to hear a lot of different things on social media, and really, we don't know what and who to trust right now. There's going to be different reports. This is fresh. So keep that in mind, especially tonight. I heard Trump wasn't going to get on air, but now I was seeing on Twitter that he might right before I came on. So let's keep an eye on that. And yeah, Jason, you just had me thinking with the opportunity costs before we bring Oliver in. The same thing I was saying a moment ago with that thought experiment of what if this was being observed in the distance by little green men on Mars or something like that. For anyone who thinks it's just the oil thing, if our nation really was a nation the way we understand it, and it had never been co-opted and it wasn't an occupied government, then when the world was moving more towards needing all of these fossil fuels for energy, for all these vehicles that were invented by us back around 100 years ago, 120 years ago or so, right? Then with all of our ingenuity, and we know we have the resources, we know that we have plenty of oil resources here in the Americas, we would have worked to make sure that we weren't held over a barrel, pardon the pun, held to these regimes that are halfway around the world, that are in a desert, that are in a different culture. It just goes to show, even the fact that we're here and entangled at this point, and the way it's been for the last many decades, is another testament to the fact that we're occupied. Because if those little green men from Mars were watching this and they understood that on a different alternate timeline, this country, really the nation that founded it, the people that founded it, it stayed true to that and was run by those people, then they would have turned all of their genius and all their vision to making sure that we were able to take this world that was moving towards needing fossil fuels and figure out ways to find it and use it, or invent totally new machines that maybe we don't even know about right now that didn't need these fossil fuels, and we wouldn't be beholden to these industries. But that's not the case. That's not the case. And we, as I said, a lot of people will continue to be the magatards and put the blinders over their eyes. But I hope that increasingly this will wake people up, where it just, you can't, how do you keep doing this and people don't see it?
Right. I'm going to bring Semiogogue on now. Semiogogue, let's welcome. Great to have you here. And let's, just for safety of the channel, let's try not to mention the name of the little country that there is an affinity for, because I know the AI is going to be listening closely for any criticism, and focus on who might be the greatest beneficiaries. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to, there's the phrase cui bono, who benefits?
Cui bono, yes.
Cui bono, who benefits by this sort of thing? Is it you in rural America? Is it you in the cities in America who are struggling to get and hold a job because you're white? Is it you who are trying to pay your soaring college costs? Is it you who have been run out of your neighborhoods? The street signs are changing. Everything's being white erased. You can't even walk down the street without fear anymore because of the hostile glares at you by people who have very alien biospirits. Is that benefiting you at all? Is it benefiting you at all that Trump has assassinated some general of some other country? Is that a benefit to you? Does your life get better by that? Is it going to be a benefit to you if Trump decides that he's going to destroy some cultural sites? When Trump said that, when I heard this thing about the cultural sites, that what really struck me immediately, and I'll pass it over to Semiogogue so we can just start at the beginning, Semiogogue, where you want to start talking about where this started and then go forward from there. But when he talked about the cultural sites, that is so un-Western. There is another people that really love, or other peoples out there that really love to destroy cultural sites. And they would be thrilled to hear that he wants to destroy some of their cherished, religious or historic or military sites or whatever it is where they are remembering. And I really couldn't care what they're remembering over there. They can just do it over there. I'm worried about our people. They can live their lives the way they want to live their lives over in that part of the world. More power to them. But to say that, well, we'll go and destroy those things they really care about. There's a group of people that are really going to go, yeah, that's great. Yeah, just wipe out what will really harm them emotionally. And that those same groups of anti-whites, isn't that exactly what they do to us? Don't they go after our statues? Don't they go after our monuments? Don't they want to erase all of our things? So whose interest is being served there? Everywhere we go, we take out little paintbrushes and we try to brush the sand away as gently as we can and blow on it and try to preserve every little thing made by every other people everywhere on planet Earth. But others, not so much. We saw with these different groups of other peoples, they went through these ancient sites, they destroyed them in Syria, and now we have these threats coming from Trump. Wonder who he's speaking to. He's certainly not talking to that corn-fed guy out there that is working on the combine, and his heart is just going to sing with joy to know that Trump wants to destroy a historic site that is going to break the hearts of people on the other side of the world. He couldn't care less. It's not going to benefit him whatsoever.
I'd like to just say one real quick thing, and then Oliver, I know you've been waiting, is I know we have to be careful here. I know in the modern world we live in, not all Caucasian peoples are the same, and we can't overreach that, and just even with someone has light features doesn't mean that they're necessarily us. But our people, being exploratory people, and there's different ideas of where it originated, but that doesn't even matter. They were there. We were there. There is some of us still there. If you're talking about 3,000-year-old sites, So I know this word gets thrown around a lot, but for the lack of a better word, I think we know generally what I'm talking about. Aryan. There are Aryan sites there that I don't know if he meant that or not, but the way that we're taking it, the way people are concerned about, is there is some of us there. If you go far back enough, we're a far-flung people, and we were there, and there are definitely sites there that would be called Aryan. And I would just like to say too, I've seen some of Trump speaking recently, and hearing him, and just intuitively, he just doesn't seem like he's there the same way he was a couple of years ago. It all seems a lot more scripted now. I don't feel like his heart's in it. So I don't want to get conspiratorial. There's nothing that I'm basing this on other than my own intuition, but it has the signs. I would say I could believe that he perhaps did begin his presidency with more noble intentions that might be a little more aligned with things we're interested in. And now there does seem to be a change in tone, that something has happened and there's a kind of compromise, and he's been whipped. He's can't resist anymore. But anyway, Oliver, this is a part of the world you know a lot about. Anyone who's new to you in our audience, and who knows who's new tonight, we always welcome these people. If they don't know, Oliver lived in Turkey for a time in his life, I believe 2 different occasions, right? The span of totaling a few years there. We know a lot about this area of the world. He made a lot of content. I didn't watch the most recent video on isolationism. I did listen to the first one, the first conversation with Tim about what was going on. But as Jason said, have at it. This is something that you know a lot about and you're passionate about. So let's just start to dig into it.
Yeah, Jared, and while he's working on it, you were going dim in your audio there, so maybe just take a look at what's going on with your mic, and I'll read this to intro Oliver. Holdebert Hildebrand, super chatting 50 Norwegian krona at the beginning of the stream. Thank you very much, good friend. Writing, this looks like it's going to be an interesting times. Everybody be safe and take care of your families. This doesn't look good right now. So thank you for that, and please, Oliver, take over.
Well, hello, gentlemen, and Happy New Year. It's great to see you both again. It's a pleasure to be on your show again. I would probably be helping you out, assisting you in contextualizing this situation and helping viewers to get a sense of what's going on. If I may be directed by you guys, or through questions that come through, I'm happy to address things, sort of individually, because this is actually, I think, a very, very big picture. We're seeing it play out here in Iran, but there are any number of different moving parts that articulate. And you guys know that I tend to get a little bit high context and to wander off into the jungle. So let me just say this at the outset, and then maybe you can ask me, whatever it is that you think that the viewers are most concerned about or would be most curious about. But I do want to say it's way too early to get freaked out about any of this. Obviously, concern is warranted because we're seeing these things unfold. But as Jason pointed out, I call part of it. He was talking about the fact that this is going to be amplified to the skies by Iran to make it look like the most resolute and thorough retaliation possible. Jason also pointed out that, depending on how we want to handle it, it's very likely that, we could turn around and talk about how terrible it was as some further justification. I've seen figures on Twitter where they're, within minutes of the first reports appearing, you had people talking about 20 plus casualties of Americans. And, this is, if you're in the middle of having things rain straight up, and whistling skies, delivering all sorts of nasty packages, it takes some time to figure out what happened afterwards, to get stuff onto a clipboard or, to click it on your little clicker for how many body bags have been dragged in. Then you have the issue of whether any information about that is going to be released by the military, who are under none of the obligations, to share things with the public that you might imagine they are. So at this point, it looks like there are no American casualties that are reported thus far. Now, if someone's heard something more recent, let me know. I'm kind of keeping an eye over here on Twitter as we talk. And apparently, 2 locations have been hit by missiles from Iran. launched from Kermanshah. They're apparently ballistic missiles, surface to surface. There are some possibility of guided missiles, which is to say cruise missiles as well. I get kind of lost in the terminology. But apparently the number of missiles fired is in the tens, was the first report. Iran officially took credit, if you will, for all of this. And now we're being told that, along with the stuff about no American casualties thus far, that a certain number of the missiles failed in flight. As Jason was talking about, these were fired from Iran into Iraq, and in some cases it appears that they were passing over not just U.S. bases that are closer to Iran, but also over larger U.S. bases. So these two that were picked out are apparently Erbil and another one in something Al-Assad. That latter one being a little bit north and west of Baghdad, I believe. So you've got a bunch of U.S. troops there. This stuff was picked up by radar and doubtless by satellite and all kinds of other strange stuff I don't know how to describe. So we are told that the soldiers who were there had enough warning to shelter in place. So right now it just seems like a big fuss. And as context, before we jump into questions, you guys have to understand, and whether I'm right or wrong, I know that this part holds true, right? Because everything I talk about is speculative. I'm informed in the sense that I read newspapers and the rest, but your mileage may vary. As with all these things, go do your own research, compare whatever I say to other sources of information and with your own good sense and come to your own conclusions. But I am sure that one thing is a certainty in this picture, and that it is much larger than Iran, and that we're dealing with a global board that has now 3 players on it. And those being, I could be nice and include the EU, as I mentioned in a previous clip, but let's just be realistic. And right now they include Russia, China, and the United States in terms of great powers with huge armies and the ability to project naval power, air power, nuclear weapons. Europe in aggregate has that, but they don't have a common army yet. They've got language barriers and they have conflicting interests. As we're seeing.
Those two non-U.S. ones have close ties with Iran. As a lot of people are pointing out, it's different than Iraq, where Iran is much more well connected.
Yes, but don't let that go too far. There was a recent naval exercise at the Straits of Hormuz with China and Russia, apparently, cooperating with these naval exercises near the Straits of Hormuz with the Iranians, and that was designed to show that there's solidarity there. But the problem is that with that model, and that's why I kind of brought this up, they're the great powers in the background. And now we're dealing with something with 3 legs instead of 2, right? Or it's not a bipolar world, it's a multipolar world, tripolar, if you will. And in the case of Russia and China, you have to remember that they both occupy Asia, and that really, Europe is essentially just a little part hanging off the side of it. So we can call it Eurasia, right? And there are many different strategic theories that are based on the idea that you have a heartland or control of the biggest continental mass, and that balanced against that are these world's naval powers at different periods in history. Britain, the United States, right? And even countries like France have fielded pretty significant navies in the past. So the idea is that you have control of the heartland and then you have control of the seas. Russia doesn't have much of a navy. I talked about some of this in a recent clip, so I won't go into it deeply. I will turn it over to questions, I promise. But Russia and China are not that closely allied. China has a giant population, and it's expanding its territory south of Russia. But there's all this huge area that's available in Russia that's way underpopulated because unique among, well, not unique, but I should say, more drastically than some of these other white countries, Russia's population has been in decline. And yet they've got this massive, massive expanse of territory. So you've got the world's most populous nation, sharing the continent of Asia with Russia. And to the south, just past the Himalayas, happily, that's a pretty high wall. You've got the second most populated country, right? So for Russia and China, they only seem to be cooperating. And they can only cooperate to a limited extent because they're essentially, as I put it in my last clip, they're in a slow motion fight to the death, but it is a fight to the death. The movements may be so slow that you don't see them, but China and Russia are only going to be getting along to a certain extent.
And what is the prize they're fighting over?
Asia, which is the heartland, which is one of the like key positions on the map. If you're not a naval power, then, you know, based on all the thinking from Mackinder up through others, the idea is that you have to maintain control of the land mass. And so you see things like their investment in, you know, massive arrays of tanks for control, and, you know, the old-fashioned land-based battles that we used to have that are very likely coming back. See, I need to stay focused, or I'm going to be all over the place. The point was that with Iran, there's context, and we have to understand that there are three great powers, and that they are the US, they're Russia, and they're China. That China and Russia only appear to be joined at the hip in support of Iran. And I can explain why. The EU has been buying lots of energy from Iran, and the EU was a major force trying to broker the peace deal with Iran, in terms of the nuclear deal, I should say. You know, so that we get this treaty and we get international inspections, but now the EU will no longer have to deal with US sanctions. They can just buy directly from Iran. And that makes them feel much better, because not all of them are really excited about buying all their energy from Russia. So there are very real reasons why Russia, for example, wouldn't actually give much of a damn about what happens with Iran. Now, it suits them to keep a seat at the table, to be able to negotiate. It suits them in many ways to be able to back up Iran so things don't happen too easily for the US. But you have a situation where Russia and China, their interests diverge. And I bring this up because then there's the next thing we got to look at, which is how many of these three great powers are self-sufficient with energy. The US is self-sufficient with energy, has recently become the world's largest exporter, and is a net exporter. Russia has a very small population, but they've got everything set to pump gas all over the joint. And that's been the big thing for stabilizing their economy and getting the ruble on a solid basis, has been putting all these pipelines in ever since, you know, Glasnost and the opening of Russia, so to speak, to the West. They've been working on it, and it's finally in place. So the two great powers out of the three, they've got their own energy. But it wasn't like that before. It used to be that everybody had to worry about what was happening in the Middle East. If Iran decided that they wanted to create a fuss, either on their own behalf or on their patrons' behalf, they could create a fuss, and guess what would happen? Oh, it's crazy at the Straits of Hormuz. There are Iranian fast boats dashing about. Who knows what could happen? It's this critical, strategically critical shipping lane. Oh my God, things could happen. And you watch the price of oil just go up by the barrel, $30 to $50 over some kind of fuss.
Do you know how much of, I know we've improved drastically in our U.S. energy self-sufficiency, but do you know how much we're still getting from the Middle East?
I can tell you that all things being equal, we don't really need it. Now, that is not to say that we're not still buying it, you know, and the rest. I'm not sure on those figures, but we are. Yeah,
I didn't know it was that far along.
Yes, we're two things that have happened in this last year or so. The United States has become the world's largest producer of oil and natural gas. Now, I won't say necessarily that we're the largest exporter, but we're the largest producer of it. A certain amount is going for our own energy needs. We're doubtless still getting energy in from places like Venezuela, probably from Saudi Arabia too. But at the end of the day, if I can use that expression, it doesn't really matter much what happens in the Middle East, but it used to. And what's important is that as soon as Trump got in office, he put Rex Tillerson in control of, as Secretary of State. Tillerson came from the energy sector, right? And so suddenly it's like pipelines, fracking, it's a gold rush. Everybody's like, let's do it. And the strategic result of that, and remember, that's the very first thing Trump did when he came into office. Look back at it. You'll hear he got in, he sat down, he got his, executive order stuff together, and next thing you know, it's the Keystone XL pipeline, this, that, and the other, right? All the problems, and no more problems with Indians protesting, right? It was go, go, go. And it was all about fracking and energy. So what did that do? That means that the Middle East is no longer something that we can be dragged into in the same way. But there's a certain small nation that I'm not supposed to mention that is also like Saudi Arabia, also like Iran, has itself also relied upon the ability to drag us in there based on the threat that energy prices would go up. And they have any number of other ways of bringing influence to bear on the United States. They've got a very powerful lobby, right? So that very country is one that would be very worried by the United States becoming energy independent. And so they have had themselves, every effort has been made by Trump, apparently, to coddle and reassure them and to let them know that, yes, you can have the Golan Heights, we'll let you keep it. Yes, yes, absolutely, you can have the embassy in Jerusalem, we're all for it, let's just move right along, right? So what I'm getting at here is that you have three major powers, but out of those, only two are energy producers. One is a giant sucking hole. That is China. And China has no reserves. Look into the figures. They've got something like 12% reserves, and they're trying to aim for 25%. They're screwed. They've been trying to pull out this horrible brown coal that's low quality. They've got horrible air pollution problems.
Do they buy it from Russia? Just Russia?
Well, they've been buying energy from Russia, from us, and from Iran. But the problem is we're in all this trade negotiation stuff and tariff stuff with them. And they want to tell us to screw off. But the problem is they still need our oil and natural gas, and Russia's. So while this is going on with Iran, that means China can't get the energy. Japan can't get the energy. Britain can't get the energy. Japanese tankers were hit in the Straits of Hormuz, and there was stuff going on, I believe, with British-owned tankers as well. So now you have the Royal Navy hanging out in the Straits of Hormuz. So basically what I'm saying is China is the desperate one here, because not only did the U.S. become a net energy exporter and the world's largest producer, but in the same time frame, they were eclipsed by China as the primary consumer. So think about this as strategy for a second. Three players, two of them are self-sufficient in terms of energy. One is not. I'm trying not to give you the finger as I count these out, right? But out of the three, one of them is not self-sufficient, and that is China. And so whenever any destabilization happens in the Middle East, Russia and the US get to sit back and laugh. The prices go up, yes, but guess what? It doesn't affect us except insofar as we get to sell to everyone else instead of Iraq. Now Libya is offline. Iran is about to go offline, has been taken offline. So the whole Middle East wants to sell. The only one that's still being allowed to do it is Saudi Arabia. But China's kind of choking in on them because they want to export by tanker out through the Red Sea, which gets you down by the Horn of Africa and Djibouti. And guess where that is? That's where Iranian money is going into making the Houthis fight Saudi Arabia. That's where you got all the Somali pirates. And golly gee, you got this little base in Djibouti, which is China's first international base away from its home country, which is right across there by the Horn of Africa and Yemen and the Houthis. I'm pointing that out to say that basically what we're trying to do to Saudi Arabia by blocking the Straits of Hormuz or creating trouble there, China is doing to Saudi Arabia because the two are fighting. But to the U.S. and Russia,
we're trying to do to Iran.
Well, the Iranians fell for a trick, and they basically.
I'm saying, I don't know if you misspoke. You said Saudi Arabia twice.
Oh yes, I think so. Yes. Yeah.
You said what we're trying to do to Saudi Arabia is what China's doing to Saudi Arabia.
Yes, but it actually is a slip because it's probably that Saudi Arabia is going to be knocked down a peg here soon. But the point is, yes, to your point, yes, we destabilized or we set something up, or Christians in action blew up the Iranian tankers and pretended, or blew up tankers there and blamed it on Iran. I don't know, or Iran was stupid enough to do it themselves. But the net is that all the people who are concerned with balance sheets and actuarial tables are looking at it and going, well, now it doesn't make sense to buy our energy in the Gulf. We could lose the whole tanker. You know, think about the cost per barrel and the cost of shipping and all the logistical issues. It makes better sense for our shareholders because remember, they have a fiduciary duty if they're publicly held, right? They'll say, no, let's not bring the oil out of the Straits of Hormuz. Let's get it from the United States and Russia. Because even if we have to pay a little more, whatever, or we don't want to do it strategically, we can rely on it arriving.
Just to push forward the conversation, not to put words in your mouth. Just
gotta.
Regular. Am I sensing a more optimistic view that Trump is perhaps angling to position American energy better?
That's already done. That's already done.
And all of this stuff on Twitter about World War III and we're just slaves to that little nation there. What is your take on that?
I don't think we're slaves to that little nation there, but I think that there's the loudest voice in that region in terms of what policy is going to unfold other than ours. And that they so interpenetrate our sort of, I don't want to call it deep state, but they so interpenetrate our executive services type, unelected bureaucracy. They so control aspects of the media and academia and all these other things that they can bring enormous pressure to bear. So any deal that's going to be worked out there, they've at least got a veto on. If it wasn't, baked from scratch in a think tank 15 years ago, and it's worked its way down the line now to being put into play. So I'm not one who would go so far as to say no, Israel, some certain small country doesn't have anything to do with it. They certainly have quite a bit to do with it, but I think they're just one of the many players. But let me get the last part out so we can jump back to that. I've totally screwed up in taking questions because as soon as I try to explain it, it goes all over the place. But
no, it's important to lay out the context, though.
So Russia has its own energy and it's a global player, but it's screwed on population. And they've been pushed into a corner. They're kind of waiting in the background quietly. The United States has the biggest military apparatus, is a net energy exporter, has the most powerful economy, and now doesn't have to worry about the Middle East anymore. Meanwhile, China is being attacked from multiple directions. Don't forget, they've had to prop their currency up a couple times with all sorts of chicanery behind the scenes. Because they can, print more money, much like we can in some respects, but they have even more leeway to make pretend, fake it till you make it. They have been struggling. They've got two pieces that they're using against Trump as negotiation, and they used them previously against other administrations. That's North Korea and it's Iran. China is connected to Iran. I know that'll sound totally crazy for people, but China moved westward. And it took over Tibet, and it took over Xinjiang. Xinjiang, Western China, where the Uyghur are, what does that butt up against? I'll answer quickly for you. It butts up against Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. Once you cross Afghanistan, what's on the other side? Iran,
yep.
Which is a massive economy. They're much more developed than all the other countries in the Middle East except for Turkey. They're a huge population. They've got huge territory. They've got beachfront property on the Caspian, and they've got it in the Persian Gulf. They're just a big, powerful country. And they're kind of a second tier country compared to like Western Europe or the US. So they're an important target for somebody like China that was working with the BRICS nations like Brazil, Russia, India, China. So basically, China has been trying to get an overland fuel supply. I'm just going to make this really short. Sorry, my mind desperately wants to explain all the points, but I'm going to lose everybody, annoy you guys, and waste your time. China wants an overland source of energy. And so it has pushed to Western China, Xinjiang. From there, it's going to have to cross Afghanistan. Russia had seen that as an issue and wanted a warm water port as well. So in the 70s, it went into Afghanistan. So it could block those kind of moves because remember, China's not its friend. Then Russia left and we bought some slightly used maps. And then we hung out in Afghanistan and wasted our blood and treasure there so we could block that trans-Asiatic corridor of infrastructure, energy, and development. Because all that needs to happen is Xinjiang needs to connect to Iran, and then China has a source of energy that we can't interdict with our Navy as easily.
So we're trying to circumvent or stop a pipeline from Iran to China.
Yes, but it would be, but you can't just think pipeline. You have to think trade corridor because One Belt, One Road is all about putting in roads, bridges, railroads, energy, pipelines, all of it in a single corridor. And It's doing it through a part of the world where it has not yet been done. I mean, the high roof of Asia and the Himalayas, Central Asia, that has been like no man's land. It only recently started to, as recently as the 1930s, you could talk about people who had never, ever seen, no European had seen Tibet. I remember that's an exaggeration.
I remember looking at places like Uzbekistan on a map with my friends when I was younger, and we were like, this is the armpit of the world. Like, what's in Uzbekistan?
Really good cotton. Who knew?
What is there? All these stands in the middle there. It's this part of the world that you don't hear much about.
But so China is trying to connect.
Right.
And once they get to Iran, that's just part of the picture. China has One Belt, One Road. They're all over Latin America. They're trying to get lithium out of Bolivia for their batteries. By the way, there's crap cans of lithium in Afghanistan, right? They're in Venezuela. But we just cut that off and Venezuela's destabilized and they know that they can't rely on Venezuela for their energy because, again, our Navy can interdict it. What they want is overland routes and they're trying to put it all together as a trade network. And so what they want to do is continue from the other side of Iran to the Eastern Mediterranean. And there were a couple of ways that could have gotten done, in my view. Again, I told you at the beginning, this is all speculation. You don't like it, come up with an alternative theory. I'm not pretending to speak with like a tablet under either arm, having just come down from Sinai.
Hopefully not. Right? Hopefully not.
Previously, they had tried to open up. Basically, remember that the EU was negotiating to work things out with Iran so that they wouldn't be contained anymore. And Obama came in and he said, let's just get this deal done. And the EU said, yeah, let's get it done together. And, you know, people like Justin Trudeau, and if he was in office at that point, basically everybody came together as the blue commies and, you know, the utopians and the globalists. And they said, we got to bring Iran online. Let's take care of this. And remember how much Obama and Netanyahu were at odds? Everybody's talking about how, you know, a certain small nation controls our government, not when Obama was in office.
I've thought of that too. Yeah.
Right. And yet Obama comes in and he tries to plug in a route from Iran across Iraq and to the Mediterranean. And you say, what are you talking about, Oliver? Well, what happened was when we cut the Iran deal, Iran was basically allowed to move in and to exercise enormous influence over Iraq. So for the last period where we used to have like the awakening councils and the Sunnis that we were supporting and the Kurds that we were supporting, suddenly you've got a Shiite Marsh Arab in office who's an ally or at least sympathetic to Iran, and Iraq becomes more or less a Shiite country, or Shiite-dominated country, because it dominates in population already. The majority of the population, if I'm remembering correctly, is actually Shiite in Iraq. Right. And so under Obama, Iran extended its influence into Iraq. And then under Obama, you get Arab Spring. And believe me, I was there in 2010. I took off right before it happened. And you could just see everything out of Turkey, mind you, not Iraq or Syria. But even there, you could feel something weird was up, like, you know, strange people on the streets giving everybody side eye. It was very odd. And I got out, and right after that, bang, spontaneously, even though later you find out that Facebook executives were involved in like coordinating stuff in Egypt, Algeria goes wonkus, and Tunisia and Egypt, and things are even weird in Iran for a little while. And then Syria pops, and everybody puts their energy into making Syria go to hell in a handbasket, and it becomes a new scene of civil war. So we were paying for that. We were paying for the ISIS people. We were paying and supporting all of that. We just left all these weapons in Iraq, and they all picked them up and used them to destabilize the area. And, you know, Obama saying, oh my God, I don't know what happened. It must be because Christians in Action came in. I mean, though he would never say that. You know, Christians in Action have worked magic, and suddenly the entire Middle East is destabilized and all these regimes are changing. But you have to look at what happened. Iran comes down to help out in Syria and to help out in Iraq because you've got ISIS, and Iran really needs to help out. And under Obama, they're supported by our air power, and they're pushing towards the sea so that they can connect Iran to the Eastern Mediterranean. But that, you have to remember, is about China connecting to the Eastern Mediterranean, because they don't just want the energy corridor.
Why were there forces inside the United States that wanted that?
Because we were totally co-opted by blue commies and globalists. I mean, we had the whole Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Justin Trudeau, Angela Merkel, that whole crew is all sort of, as best I can tell, some kind of European Fabian compromise with the Chinese communists that acts as a counterbalance to both Russia and the US. Look what happened. As soon as Trump comes into office, out of nowhere, everyone's talking about how he can't cooperate with Russia. He's Putin's stooge. It's Russia, Russia, Russia. And I'm like, what? I'm old enough to remember the Cold War, and nobody talked about Russia this much, even when Russia was a problem. Mm-hmm. It's almost like Chinese money came in, because we're dealing with a three-legged stool now. And the last thing China wants is for the US and Russia to cooperate. So powers that be in the United States, I believe, wanted to cut that corridor from Iran through Iraq to the Eastern Mediterranean on behalf of China, but the EU would get a cut. But Russia said no. And Russia came in and blocked it, not us. We were trying to put it all into place. And maybe we would do it with Kurdistan. And Turkey's kind of like, no, no. And you remember that Obama wasn't getting along with Turkey, and Obama wasn't getting along well with Russia, and Obama wasn't getting along well with Israel. But now Trump has come in, and we're suddenly getting along with Turkey, sort of. And Russia is just sitting there with their base in Latakia. Now, understand, if you take a look at, and this is all going to make sense in a minute as related to Iran, because what you have to look at is they tried to run a corridor from Iran out to the Eastern Mediterranean. How are they going to do that? Well, they do it through Kurdistan, which just got settled. Turkey said, no, we're not going to allow that. Russia agreed with Turkey, and now they've got a corridor that they're co-patrolling. That's one route. You have to remember that area that they're patrolling. Don't think of it as just an area. It's one possible path from Iran. And again, that means for China also, from Iran to the Mediterranean. Go a little bit south. Well, then they hit the Syrian coast, and guess who's got that blocked? The Turks have the area. Turks have the northern part of that coast blocked. Just below that, the Turks have paid proxies in Idlib to foment instability, so you can't get out there. Just below that, the Russians have their naval base at Latakia, and they've propped up the Syrian government. And just below that, you've got Lebanon. And just below that, you've got Israel. So the entire Eastern Mediterranean is blocked off. Everybody who has a seat at the table is all sitting there going, I want a piece of it. Russia's like, hey, we've been in Latakia for a while. We don't want anybody punching an energy pipeline along our underbelly through the stands and undercutting our ability to be the energy providers for China and all these other nations. What, are you crazy? You think we're going to allow that? And Syria is like, well, we'll just do whatever Russia says because we're a rump state now that only exists because they propped us up. Turkey feels bellicose and pushes down to take care of the Kurds, which I think was set up a long time ago to create another one of these corridors.
So Oliver, why don't we just get to this? And I know it's important, and we want to look at audience questions too.
Yes.
I've been focused on what you're saying, so I've been looking at the chat a little while. What does all of this have to do? Because you obviously
with Soleimani being hit.
Yes, you have a frame here. What caused Trump to say yes on the hit?
In 1979, our embassy was, I believe it was 79, but it was the late 70s when the Iranians took our hostages.
Right.
And I was alive for that, though very, very young, and I remember it. So now we've got a situation where there's a U.S. embassy, and really embassy is kind of, lying about it. It's a gigantic military complex that's fortified and enormous, like a tiny city inside. And suddenly this whole thing gets surrounded by Iraqis who are upset with the U.S. But there were a few things that happened before that. There was some sort of attack on apparently U.S. troops, or at least contractors, and one American died and some other people. And then against this whole background, for the last 2 months, at a minimum, it's been unstable in Iraq, and there have been all kinds of people taking to the streets to protest. And they're Shiites. They're Iraqi Shiites who have probably been paid by the U.S. But anyway, they're out in the streets saying, we're sick of Iran being in Iraq. You have to realize that's been going on for months now, and nobody pays attention to it in the West. So there has been a steady...
There are a lot of sympathizers, Shiites that are in Iraq that are sympathetic with Iran as well.
Absolutely. But now, remember, this is before Soleimani got hit.
They're all Shiite, and Iraq is more of a cobbled together state, whereas Iran... Old Persian Empire has a much more cohesive history.
And don't forget that you've got different types of Shiites. And you even got kind of groups that are sort of Shiite, but kind of moved past it, like the Druze, right? So don't think of the Shiites as monolithic. There are strong sectarian divides.
Nothing really is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But so you're right. There are a lot of Shiites in Iraq that support Iran, but there are some who are at least...
Having said all that, there's been unrest. There was the embassy thing. But
right. And so our embassy...
guy who's this folk hero there.
He's not just a folk hero. He was involved in the first embassy attack. He's like Ahmadinejad, who used to be in office. He's one of the original revolutionaries who was involved with the embassy nonsense and the revolution that took over Iran from the beginning. And now he was in the area doing his stuff. Now, I'm not into extrajudicial killings and assassinations. I think that's not something that we should be doing. I'm against that sort of thing. So bear that in mind. That's my official position, right? I have no influence of any kind, obviously, on any of this, but I'm not for it.
You do here on After Hours.
Well, yes, I'll change the world. Okay, I got to get to this point because you'll see why I brought up the whole business of the Levantine coast and how it's blocked. And I'll explain it through Soleimani, right? So you have a situation where trouble has been brewing in Iraq for a while, for several months now. And everybody thinks we're about to go to war with Iran. No, we've been at war with Iran and the EU and China for 3 years now. It's just non-kinetic, but it is war. Make no mistake about it. And we've been, I mean, look, a blockade is an act of war. We could say we've put economic sanctions on them. That's a blockade. A blockade is an act of war. It means you're choking off the country. And we're considering putting varieties of tariffs and things on the EU and China to be polite, but we've got a real blockade on Iran. We are at war. We're not about to start a war. We've been at war. Iran knows we're at war. And we've got this trouble against that background that's been brewing in Iraq. And it looked like they were about to get wild. They did breach part of the embassy. They set some, I mean, the outer part nonsense, processing gates and that kind of thing. And you know, admittance rooms. So it wasn't anything serious, but they were setting things on fire, causing trouble, and it could be a mess. So you got this guy, Soleimani. Where was he coming from when he arrived at the Baghdad airport and was likely struck by Hellfire missiles? Where was he coming from? There are two stories about where he's coming from. One is Syria, and it hasn't been verified, and one is Lebanon. Syria, meh. I tend to think it was probably Lebanon because we've now seen that Hezbollah has started making noises tonight. When you look at that Levantine coast and you start with the Sanjak of Alexandretta, which Turkey took from Syria, and then you come down and you see the base of Latakia and the Syrian coast, then you come down, you've got Lebanon and Israel. Below that, you've got Sinai.
Right.
And Egypt has been staying very quiet. I mean, absolutely quiet. It's so crazy how quiet they've been staying. Which is that has to be borne in mind. So basically, if you want to punch out from Iran to the sea, Syria, you ain't got it. Turkey, you ain't got it. It's been blocked. Israel, please, right? So what does that leave? It leaves Lebanon. But Lebanon has been locked down. So it's isolated into different parts, and they get into wars with Israel, and the Christians have been driven out.
Iran is trying to get to the Eastern Mediterranean because they're discovering more oil there. And
they've discovered so much oil and natural gas off of Lebanon, all around Cyprus and Israel and North Africa, running from Egypt to Libya, which bears on everything we're talking about right now. Basically, the entire Eastern Mediterranean is about to come online as an alternative to Iran. So basically, Iran recognizes that as a source of natural gas. And guess who's going to be selling it from Cyprus and Lebanon and Israel to Europe? The Russians have to have been cut in on the deal. A number of European energy companies have been cut in on the deal. I'm sure Jared Kushner, the Israelis, and those folks are cut in on the deal. Look under Leviathan gas fields, do a search for it, or look under Aphrodite gas fields off of Cyprus. And then just do a search for Eastern Mediterranean natural gas deposits and look at some of the recent ones that show what's there. So Iran's been surrounded. We've been at war with them this whole time. This isn't something that's just starting. They're desperate. They're about to be crushed. And this is important in negotiations with China because how Iran is handled is definitely sort of a dry run, let's hope, for how North Korea will be dealt with. And China is behind making both of those particularly thorny problems that keep anyone from changing the status quo. Iran's about to be totally isolated. The embassy was overrun. Israel has been hawkish about, hitting Iran for quite some time now. So all these confluences come together. Soleimani was the number 2 guy in the country. Enormously powerful. All sorts of experience with the military and the rest. And he specifically, the Quds Force and the rest, is all about special operations. And he was likely coming from Lebanon. I don't know if anybody remembers 2006 and the war between Lebanon and Israel, when Israel was supposed to go in and slap them around and found out it was way more trouble than they thought. And that Hezbollah was heavily trained and supported by the Iranians. And everybody's question is just how many thousands and thousands of missiles do they have stockpiled in Lebanon? This guy was just leaving either Syria or Lebanon. I tend to believe, given all these things I'm talking about, that he was actually coming from Lebanon. I tend to believe it's probably Israel that provided the intel on where it could be hit. Israel might even have done it, but the U.S. jumped in to say that they did it because they're less likely to have the retaliation hit them than Israel would if they were acting alone about it. It also affects Israel's ability to cut deals in the future with the other Arab countries that they have tenuous peace with, right? But Soleimani is super important because there will be regime change in Iran. not because I want it, not because I think it's right, but all the players of the great game, it looks like they're getting it sorted out. China's the last one that's backing them. Russia's pretending to, but I told you they don't give a damn. They can sell that oil instead. They only care because they want to keep a seat at the table. Also, you got to remember, in terms of Central Asia and the stands, there are only two countries that could kind of become the anchor for development in that region. China wants to be, but the West would have to produce an alternative, and it will be either Iran, because the ancient Sogdians went as far as what's now Western China once upon a time, so they have cultural connections, right? Or Turkey, because the Uyghur are a form of Turks, right? And so both of those groups have been trying to fill that area, but Russia, I don't think, is going to let Iran do it when it's under Chinese control or with China as its primary patron, because of that business of them both competing for that territory. So anyway, Iran's going to go away whether I like it or not, in the sense that the regime will change. Now, what do most people do? What did Ceausescu do in Romania when the time had come? Well, what did the Securitate do? They pretended that Ceausescu fell, and they had a trial for him, and he got dragged out of the Casa Popolului and killed somehow, and suddenly Romania was free again. That's just because the Securitate said, well, get rid of him and we'll just calm everything down. That's the beauty of democracy, right? You just change the figureheads and you keep operating. Well, in Iran, what would be their best bet to do that? So Soleimani is one step off from being in the theocratic camp, because he's not actually a mullah or an imam or an ayatollah, right? And yet he's got all the street cred of being a part of the original revolution, but he's a war hero too. So he could have bridged those worlds. So by taking him out, whoever's idea it ultimately was, first off, you say, we're not playing at all. We will engage in this very real form of violence and knock you out in a targeted way. And I mean, the whole thing of the targeted assassination thing, yeah, we did it in World War II to Yamamoto, but it's really a thing that Israel focuses. That's their style, right? You know, knock on the roof, family leaves the house, destroy the house, you know, all this kind of stuff. Like, you'll personally be held accountable. That's why it kind of smells a little more like an Israeli tactic. I'm not supposed to be talking about this small country. You've heard, however, that I have not said anything bad about them. Mm-hmm. The point here is that it was a twofold thing. One, he was about to start trouble. For sure, he was working on trouble. Now, I'm not saying...
How can you be so sure of that?
Look at his history. Do you know anything about him?
What are your sources for something like that?
How do you think? What do you think that Shiites would mobilize en masse to surround and agitate and cause a fuss around a U.S. diplomatic and military emplacement without Iran's permission?
Oh, that's something he already did, but you're saying he's going to do something else.
Well, yeah. What do you think he would be doing down in Lebanon? And now you hear Nasrallah talking about how he's going to hit Israel and there will be rockets raining in, and that if we attack Iran, then Iran will not only strike back against us, but Hezbollah will attack Iran. And at the same time, Iran will attack the United Arab Emirates and maybe even Bahrain and teach them a lesson. This is that guy's specialty. Now, I'm not saying, I mean, we do the same things. I'm not trying to say he was a monster. He was extremely capable and experienced, and he was the guy in charge. He had the best brain. So you take him out, you cut out the ability of the Iranians to make chaos in the same way that they could in Lebanon and Syria and Iraq, because you just took out their best guy. Number two, if Iran tried to do a regime change thing to just sort of like paint a new, repaint the house and pretend it was a different country, he was the perfect one for it. And so Trump is saying things, for example, about going after their cultural stuff. I am a firm believer that was entirely intended to make him and everyone else freak out. Make Iran and everyone else freak out. Because you talk about cultural things in Iran, that means sacred mosques and holy places that are in Iraq and Iran, like Karbala, and their martyrs Hassan and Hussein. An Iranian, when they think about something cultural being attacked in a war, remember they fought with the Sunnis. It's Shiite holy places. He tapped that intentionally. I think it's total speculation, but it was designed to make them everything seem more furious, threatening, and crazy for them, because you want them to react. You want them to react beyond any kind of reasonable level because it makes him look bad. No matter what Trump does, as long as he doesn't use nuclear weapons and as long as he doesn't put boots on the ground in the region, then this is going to be a catastrophe for Iran. Because you have to remember, they just fired all kinds of ballistic missiles into Iran, probably. I mean, we have to see, God knows, right? They're talking about, they just did military exercises with China and Russia at the Straits of Hormuz. But they've also started their nuclear enrichment and the rest. So the more that they do that looks like kinetic war, paired with the fact that they've started their nuclear program, is just going to, those simple facts, even if they never use a nuclear weapon, the simple fact that they started their program again, and the fact that they're engaging in things that are more like kinetic war, like missile strikes at multiple locations and threatening Bahrain and United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, all that does, that's why I say they're being idiots. All that does is support Trump's position that something must be done with these people. Look, they're threatening to attack all these countries. And next thing you know, United Arab Emirates is like, we're behind you. Bahrain's like, we're behind you. Saudi Arabia's like, we're behind you. Egypt's like, I'll remain strangely silent because there's so much money to be made, right? All it does is the more they try to, it's like they should stop digging. When you find out you're in a deep hole, you should stop digging. But because their best military commander, the one who actually had some skills, he just got blown out. They've got to now ask second and third and fourth ranked people what's going on. So perhaps that is a helpful answer.
Okay, I have a question, and then Jason, I'm curious if we have audience questions yet. United States, if there are interests in the Trump administration actually acting in the interests of the United States a little bit more like we would understand it, and that maybe the common people don't understand it, but all this stuff where we're saying, oh man, we're sticking our nose in this regime change, but we're actually playing defense against China getting this pipeline, but we can't really come out and say that. Your take sounds a little more optimistic. But what do you say to the people who would listen to all of this and appreciate the perspective, appreciate the frame, but say, aren't all of these Middle Eastern adventures a classic tar baby kind of thing? I know you, Tim, talk about that, the tar baby thing, where you think you're going to get involved and do something to benefit yourself, and it ends up taking 5 times longer, 5 times, 10 times more costly than
thousands of dead kids, and all this money lost.
People that are burnt and melted. We see these horrific images of Marines came back for their weddings, and their bride is standing next to Freddy Krueger.
Right, or Jason talking about how do you measure the lost opportunities in terms of if all that money and time and energy, all those lives were invested elsewhere. Yeah. I look at it, I think this is a part I left out previously, so I'll say it very fast. I think the reason this happened is because China has to go after Trump because it looks like he's going to be reelected. The business of impeachment didn't work. All the various ways of making him look bad that he seems to be so cooperative about, they don't affect his core popularity in any meaningful way. So China knows something has to be done. So part of this is to create a quagmire they think that Trump will get involved in, because I'll guarantee you this: if he does some boots on the ground war, his support is going to have, like, the people who do support Trump. You can make fun of the MAGA tards or whatever, but like, they care about that part of it. And you see the dumb ones on Twitter or whatever, where they're like, destroy them all. Yeah, teach them a lesson. But like the ones who are in the military and the rest, they don't want to do this crap again. They really don't want to do this crap again. And it'll make him look like an enormous liar. So I think that's part of the move, is to create just this fear and undermine his base on the part of the Chinese, for example, and the Europeans, who have everything to gain by him going and everything to lose if he stays. All these EU powers are being screwed by Trump right now. They're desperate. I mean, they're really desperate. Once the Brexit thing comes online, Brexit is the fact that Britain leaves is going to entirely change the shape of economics in the European Union. And they're set for another wave of refugees, which is highly amusing from the perspective of geopolitics, because it might be just enough to cause them to develop a gag reflex and settle this once and for all. But That's not the issue. The issue is it's a tar baby. You get dragged in. So you're kind of saying, how could you possibly be optimistic about this, Oliver? And I'm not entirely, but I'm a little bit. How could you be optimistic about this when we know that every time we've gone in there, it's been a horrible mess? It just never seems to end. It's the sandbox, right? It's the downrange hellhole. I'll say this. Turkey took Cyprus in 1974. They took northern Cyprus in 1974. What are we now seeing is critically important as a deep water gas liquefaction and shipping hub? Cyprus. Lebanon was a banking center that was gorgeous and beautiful. It was like the Paris of the East, right? Beirut. Cedar trees and long walks along the Mediterranean at the seaside, right? Gorgeous place, very stable. All sorts of French and European investment. 1970s, revolution, disappears, goes to hell in a handbasket. And in the 1970s, there was a major move to set up oil refining and stuff in Italy on the Italian peninsula. That didn't go well. The Italian economy got the shit slapped out of it, excuse my language, and all that fell to pieces. Italian, which is to say European refining, Cyprus divided, fall of Lebanon. Clearly some decision was made because the whole area was coming together just fine. Yeah, you had issues originally with Nasser wanting to fight with Israel, and there was the PLO and stuff, but I mean, by comparison, the 1960s and 70s was a much more chill place, much more stable place. And then it all gets taken offline. So you ask Oliver, how could you possibly think that there could be anything that would be good about this or that we could get out? Well, I don't have proof, but I've seen a number of signals. One of them is that it looks like they're going to have to come to some resolution about Cyprus soon, or maybe leave it divided, kind of like Hispaniola, where you've got Haiti and Dominican Republic. So you can be on the same island, but cross into two different economic zones with different rules, which is something traders love, right? Israel is going to be connected to that network. And it looks like Lebanon will be too, because the gas finds off the coast are in their territorial waters. And plus, it'll just look better for Israel if they do it as a consortium. They can control everything economically or be major players within it without having to overtly take over the territory. I just mentioned this in a recent clip. Everyone's like, on plan, Israel's going to take over everything. And I'm like, no, they don't have to. They don't have to. They can operate just as we do across national borders through economic mechanisms, just like they do in the US. It's like everybody's like, how will Israelis and Jewish persons, upright, worthwhile Jewish persons, good people, one and all, right? How will they make money unless, Israel gets greater Israel as its territory? I'm like, look at every other country they've ever operated in. Do they need to take control of territory in order to make large amounts of money and exercise outsized control relative to their population size? No. So it looks like some things are happening with Lebanon. There's this guy named Carlos Ghosn, last name spelled Ghosn.
Very interesting video on him. I'd never heard of him. I would suggest everyone watch.
Nor had I.
Name your video that you did on him.
Oh, it's like Iran and Lebanon. But anyway, so I'll give you the short version. Ghosn, as you know about, other people want to find out about it, they can go back and see my video. But Ghosn is in Lebanon, and Hezbollah is making a fuss about Lebanon at the same time. Ghosn had been tapped apparently to be a possible player there. He's a technocrat baron, and yet in November of 2018 everybody comes down hard on him and tries to lock him up and push him out of all these boards. I mean, he's on the boards or a CEO of some of the largest automotive conglomerates. Like, it's just insane. He's one of these captains of industry, and then he escapes from his party where he's under house arrest in Japan.
Yeah, it sounds like something out of a Bond movie.
Inside of a stand-up base case.
Yeah.
By paramilitaries who fly him secretly to Lebanon?
Yeah. You guys have to hear the story in Oliver's video.
Yeah, it's over on the video. But so remember I said in the 70s, Lebanon was crushed. But now we see moves, like something's going to be done to unfreeze that broken bone there, right?
Are you saying that
Cyprus was frozen in the 70s, and it looks like we're about to get resolution.
About the stability of the 60s and 70s, that someone or some forces are trying to rectify that all these decades later?
Or they decided they'd go with one plan, and I don't know that it's about rectifying it. I don't think there's any real moral consideration.
Well, no, not morally, but whoever
No,
was
but
benefit.
I think that they didn't, that for some reason, somebody who had veto power, some nation or some player or some company or some Illuminati wearing stag horns, I don't know, man. Somebody came along and said, not just yet.
Yeah.
And
So
we've
you
had
don't.
all the mess. And now
So
it
you
looks
don't
like
seem
something's
to.
coming in.
You don't seem to factor in as a big influence here, the angle that there are people in that little nation that are trying to push along their vision of the apocalypse or something, and biblical prophecies
Maybe,
about
but usually the
temples
most,
and land and who owns the land. Because I haven't heard
most,
any of that. Like, you think that's all
most,
nonsense?
no, I would just say that most of the people who are in control of the military in that country are not the ones with, funky haircuts and big black hats. They're Ashkenazi, European, in large part, not all, but they're a caste that has control over the military, or let's say a social strata. I don't want to say anything negative, right? But there are certain social strata with a certain background, and while I'm not trying to say that they don't think that all the Jews in Israel are Jews, they see it as being their role to be in charge of things. It's like an Ariel Sharon or a Benjamin Netanyahu, right? They have a specific approach. They have a specific background. While there are apocalyptic type people full with fantasies that would be confirm prophecies and all the rest, and I don't doubt there are plenty of them in Israel, right? We have them here in our, some of our evangelical communities.
Yeah, certainly.
I don't think they're the ones in charge of the military. And I don't think they're the ones taking, I believe probably China and the EU are behind the Benny Gantz guy who, they just had an election there, and they were split in terms of their support. Netanyahu couldn't win. They're doing the same thing they've been doing for 10 or 20 years to try to bring charges against him. Benny Gantz couldn't get power either, though. Netanyahu blocked him. Trump looks like he's worked all this stuff out that's going to happen beforehand with Netanyahu. I'm guessing, again, of course. And so I think part of this will also, everyone's like, oh, it's just Trump distracting from impeachment. No, but I will say, I mean, that has nothing to do with this, but I will say that it is quite possible that a crisis response on the part of Israelis, fear over what might happen, what they have to be ready for, will be leveraged by Netanyahu to win the election that is coming up. Guess when? In March, just a couple months away.
Okay. Is there anything in all of this that could benefit Americans and people listening?
Yeah, I hope so. And that's why I'm optimistic. I could be completely wrong. I know that there are a bunch of people who are going to hammer me, but I believe...
Is this kind of a higher IQ, trust the plan?
Oh, God. I deserve that. I guess I deserve that. No, I don't trust it yet. I just, the signs I see don't, there are 100 different ways we could come at it. Like, are China and Russia actually going to allow World War III to break out? They have an interest in the world continuing to exist, right? They've got long experience with client states, right? So I wouldn't say trust the plan. I would say, and because none of what I'm talking about has ever come out of the mouth of any kind of Q mouthpiece that I'm aware of. If that is not the case, please let me know. But I didn't see anybody taking a look at, northern Cyprus and off-sea gas fields off the Levantine coast. I'm not sure. I could completely be wrong, but the signs to me seem to indicate that. Remember, Trump wants the whole peace thing, right? Trump's ego you can rely on. You can rely on his ego. He wants to be remembered by history as being a great man from his own perspective. Believe me, anybody with a golden toilet, the ego is fully in effect, right?
The ego's online.
Yes, fully online. We got a 10 on ego, sir, right? And so I believe that he sees it as a challenge, actually, to cut a deal in the Middle East. But the only way that you're going to be able to do that is if everybody's going to get a slice of something. That's the one thing that everybody forgets. Yes, Trump has any number of flaws, but he is a businessman. His goal is to see people doing business. He's not just any businessman. He's in real estate. And what does he do with real estate? He sets up the building within which space is organized and different people have to buy their little pieces and interact. That's what he does in his mind. He likes to create a space in which these other people will interact. And in order to get them in there, he has to get them to believe they'll make money. Good foot traffic. Or don't you want to be in the food court here in Trump Tower? You know, your bagel place, Dove, is going to go great over here. You know, that's what he comes from. Down to the position, right? It's great real estate. It looks like he came from central casting. Yeah, we got to be in a good position for this. Let's get everybody working together. It's a win-win. This kind of talk. He's going to have to give people things. And I'm wondering myself, what is he going to give them? Well, if you take a look at the Eastern Mediterranean natural gas fields and the number of them that have been discovered off the coast of Libya, off the coast of Egypt, off the coast of Lebanon. And if you think about the fact that all of this is on the water, which means you can't just give somebody, you know, strap a claymore to the outside of his little, you know, rag outfit and send him running in with 2 goats to blow things up. No, it's at sea. And what is the type of power that we have? Sea power, which means that all this energy infrastructure and all this investment will be to some extent insulated from terroristic attacks and all the rest, simply because it's more easy to deny people access because we're terrestrial animals. So take a look at where all of this gas and stuff is coming into play. Take a look at the odd silence of Egypt and then compare it on the map to the gas fields there, right? These are the kinds of things. I could talk for a long time. I'm sorry. I swear to God, I'm going to try to keep this short. That is one of the reasons why I think it's not just to trust the plan. That said, there are plenty of opportunities to screw this up. And at any moment in these coming days, it could be screwed up and badly. You know, Trump has been oddly capable. I know that most of the people in our circles do not agree with this, but I've just seen too many things that are way, way cunning on his part to buy the idea that he's a simpleton and a buffoon.
I was going to ask if you think he plays dumb.
No, I think that that's his natural appearance, but I'm older now. I sat down in a meeting one time with this guy who owned a car dealership and this other guy who's a big lawyer for musicians. And he's out here on the East Coast, so he's not the biggest. They're all on the West Coast or they're in New York. But he's a pretty big player. When I sat down, I was going to pitch this cartoon idea, and these 2 old men are sitting there, and we're all in our best suits because we got this great idea that we're going to pitch, and we fought our way to this position. I did. I'm like, man, this is crazy. How many people will get in for this meeting, right? I had a great cartoon idea. These 2 old men are looking at each other, and they just keep us from talking for a few minutes. They just totally ignore us, and they're talking about their planes just to kind of put us in our place. They're talking about their jets. Oh, well, you know, mine, I got a new one, Lou, that, you know, it's a little bit better. And when I started talking, I remember I was doing my pitch, and I remember the guy whose money I needed to make this happen, this old dude. And he's just looking at me while I'm talking, and he's doing all these Robert De Niro, like, puke faces. He's all like, old men do that shit. Old men are smart. Young people who think that you have to look smart to be smart, especially high IQ people, because I'm not going to toot my horn. You know, I don't have the highest IQ in the world, but I have a high IQ. And I grew up thinking that if somebody's smart, they're going to show it. And then I got screwed a few times in my life, always by older men who were really, really smart and didn't care at all if anybody knew they were smart. They're so far past that. They're looking at their goals. They get a thrill out of knowing that everybody failed to take them properly into account.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Down home, we call that dumb like a fox. So let's jump in. This has been a deep geopolitical dive here tonight, ladies and gentlemen. It's really been fantastic to have Oliver on again, and we will definitely be having him back in the future. And Oliver, just so you know, no insult to you. I'm going to say this for the AI and all of the anti-whites that are watching now, but everything Oliver shared here tonight is his informed opinion. It may or may not be correct. You have to ask YouTube whether or not it is correct. So turn to YouTube if you have any question about whether or not the things Oliver shared tonight are true or untrue. And now we have some super chats. We just had Mrs. Jess Horse, wonderful lady, participant in our community, super chatting $19.99. Thank you my dear lady, saying a lot to the anti-whites about what she thinks about them. Farmmaster Flex, super chatting $2 a little earlier in the evening, writing multipolar for when bipolar isn't crazy enough. Thank you very much for that. We have Zero Talon over here on the familiar alternative. Thank you. Another great participant in service to White Wellbeing, super chatting $5. And it has a question here. Brits call Middle Eastern people Asian. Are Russians Asian? Sleepy thoughts. Any idea there, Oliver?
Oh, I don't even want to wade into that. That's a controversial thing, isn't it? If you
Russia's big. Russia's big, and there are many ethnicities there.
Absolutely, right.
And
some of them actually are Asian.
I mean, look at a map as you go further to the east. It's a gradient from European lands and culture into Asiatic. So there's overlaps.
Precisely. Now we have also, those are the super chats, and we have unsafe spaces. And asking, I would ask how Oliver thinks the next 30 days will play out with this situation.
Oof. I have no idea.
It could be 31.
Pardon?
It could be 31 days. We'll give you some leeway.
Right, man. No, I don't think we're going to go into nuclear war. Trump is very good at baiting people and causing them to rush in. And he's made something of a name for himself doing exactly that by bluster, get people to come in, think he's stupid, foolishly do this, that, or the other thing. I think in this case, so you have to remember that that whole Middle Eastern area doesn't really matter anymore. It's the global energy commons, and it really matters to China. It really matters to, for example, Germany. Yes, because they don't want to have to buy from Russia. It really matters to Japan, but to us it doesn't, which means Iran, and Iran's already signaled it. Look what they're doing. It used to be Iran and the US, but just tonight, Soleimani gets killed, and then Iran sends some rockets in, and what's the first thing you start seeing on Twitter? They're threatening to hit the United Arab Emirates. They're threatening to hit Israel. They're threatening to destabilize Lebanon. Right? They're immediately trying to get all these other countries involved, which means I saw it once, and actually I was very happy about it. I had an issue with bullies that is a little bit like what Jason has talked about in Bored Guilty. Mm-hmm. I'm remembering it right? Yes. And I remember I had this thing in high school where I was like, I got to go in and I got to deal with this. There's only one way to deal with this, and that's to walk straight in and punch them in the face. Now, I'm not recommending that. I'm not endorsing violence and the rest, but it was a formative experience as a young man where I realized that in order to deal with the trouble, I had to walk in and punch him in the face. The problem is that when I saw the guy and I was ready to do it, there were three of them. There was just one of me. And of course, I'm just a high school kid, early grades of high school. And so I go just walking straight forward, and I deck the guy in the face, and it turns into this scuffle, and we're all, rolling around like kids, And the three of them, who are all older, they were in older grades than the rest, they started to get a hold of me, and it started to look bad for me. And right at that moment, it was broken up. And I recognized the value in a fight. Sometimes you can make a dramatic gesture and then rely upon, I did not plan on this, but I learned it after the fact. All these other people run in and break it up. Iran talking about attacking all these other countries suddenly. I mean, we're going to send a few rockets out. We're no confirmed casualties yet. And we're going to attack all these other countries too. Don't let that happen. It's kind of like calling everyone in to break the fight up. It's trying to bring the pressure of these other countries to bear. They don't have any real levers to play with. We've been at war with them for quite some time in the terms of blockading them. They're more and more desperate. The only fear you really have is if the individual players in charge get so desperate that they feel they have no other choice. And I think what we're probably going to see is more of a certain country's model of targeted attacks of individuals. Maybe, but I don't think we're going to have nuclear war, and I think it's going to calm down. This is right now it looks like a big kabuki theater. I hope it is. I hope.
Next question, a little off the topic. Nick is writing here, why would Pelosi want, quote, use of force bill to stop Trump? Could she and the Dems have something to lose? I don't know anything about that, Nick. Do either of you? No, I haven't heard about it.
My only, I've heard something about her wanting to constrain what Trump can do through legislation. The short answer to that is Obama came through and cut all these deals, probably with China, certainly with Iran, because it's a matter of public record. And the EU was big on that. And, Obama likes to travel to the EU and do tours and things and talk about what a civilized socialist he is.
Drink wine.
Yes, indeed, like the elites should and do. The point is, all those folks invested. That's just the political side of it. So you had European energy companies that were all over the Middle East and cut all kinds of deals with Iran and other countries to continue to line their pockets. And the fact that all of this has been thrown up in the air means that their financial fortunes have been thrown up in the air. And that includes people like the Bidens, who were doing deals with Burisma in Ukraine. You don't think some of that interest, or at least on the part of their backers, extends to Iran, extends to offshore this or that pipeline. Pelosi has every reason, just as the Europeans do, to try to stop Trump, not least because if they can get him bogged down in a mess here, they might be able to win re-election. So I think it's part of that as a background, but I'm not sure.
We have Hansa super chatting $5. Thank you, my dear friend, and writing, hell, man, if Slavs were Asians, you wouldn't see all the blondes and beauties amongst them. Thanks so much for that, Hansa.
Yeah, Slavs are not Asians. I don't think anyone here said that.
No, Sky Chaser, and of course that's just a semantics issue. They are members of Western kind. Sky Chaser writing with $4.99 over here on YouTube. Thank you very much for that kind investment. New to the movement. How can I get involved in my local area and make a difference? Well, the first thing you can do is you can start watching Go Free on Sundays at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We talk all the time about what you can do to get involved in service to white well-being, not the least of which is using the proper dialectics and lexicon, writing our own story. That is the most important thing, and that we shared in this past Sunday. 2 very interesting. So go back and watch that 5.5 hour Going Free stream, and you'll hear about one of our greats, Roy Danton, and another one that I call the hero, and how they engaged some anti-whites online. It's a new vocabulary, essentially, we have to use in order to win our conversations. And those 2 gentlemen destroyed the anti-whites that they came in contact with. And just so you know, right now, Go Free, the digital version, the Kindle version of Go Free, is available for the first 299 downloads. This is where you will learn the dialectics and lexicon that we use here, and it is ever expanding. So digitally, you'll be able to get the new editions, or iterations, as I say, to the 2nd edition, as I add more material to it. And it's $2.99 for the first 299 downloads. That is available right now. Another thing that you can do to get started right away, and join us, and we will happily give you all the advice and tips that you need to improve yourself, those around you, help those people go free, and treat yourself for the mean pathogens you're infected with. So thank you being here tonight. We have a question here from the great Fornull, and he writes, ignore if this has already been asked, but does Semiogogue think we're heading on to World War III, or is it just more military strikes ad nauseum?
I think you've largely addressed that.
Yeah. Mainly, it's just, I don't think we're on the way to World War III unless there's some horrible fumble in this, some horrible miscommunication. And I suppose that is, it's always a possibility. I hope in this case it's remote, though.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, you had a final question.
Well, I'm not speaking for myself. I'm just trying to take in other perspectives and imagine if there were perhaps other people here tonight, how they might volley with you. Why are we there in the first place? Is it the kind of thing where when we look at the people who are upset on Twitter, and I mean upset for what we would call the right reasons, largely, a lot of people in our ranks, and again, I know this is not a monolithic thing. As we said, nothing is really monolithic, but people that I follow on Twitter in my sphere, I'm seeing a lot of them tonight say, I regret having voted for Trump. This is some kind of a final straw. And what would you say to the person who's saying, well, why are we there in the first place? What was this, Project for a New American Century and the famous thing that's always referenced about General Wesley Clark? back around the turn of the millennium saying we're going to invade X amount of, I think it was 7 Middle Eastern countries, and there was a whole plan. We know that there are greedy people. We know that there are people who are just out to make money in all of this, obviously. But it sounds like, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds to me, the way I would interpret it is, some of what you said tonight is there's all this statecraft and maneuvering that, yeah, it's messy, and yeah, there are a lot of godless, greedy people that get mixed up in this. But there are also forces that the common person out there might not be able to appreciate. They're actually protecting, even though we know America's compromised. And Jason and I were talking about this before you came on, how large parts of our government are occupied, and we all know there's some things done against our interests, Americans' interests. I don't have to rehearse that. But nonetheless, some of what you're talking about, particularly with what sticks out to me, is you were speaking about how we were kind of playing defense against China, getting these pipelines and their roads and all of that infrastructure there. That there's actually something beneficial about it, and not to insult the people out there. And I'm learning about this from you. I'm learning about it as I go. So I'm just thinking out loud right now. But it's almost as if, these people can say what they want on Twitter, but really there's things going on here that are above a lot of people's heads. You've made a study of this. I'm not propping you up as the one sole
Right. Most of it's probably above my head, to be honest. I mean, I'm just guessing.
Either, right. And I know you have the right degree of humility about that as well. But what is it? I'm just trying to rectify. Maybe it'd be good to have you back on and speak to someone who has a totally different perspective. Because again, my view is always just to kind of take a step back and see how it all unfolds. I don't want to, as a content creator, and I don't know if anyone else shares this, I kind of feel it's strange that I have the pressure to kind of say something because I have a little bit of an audience and all that. But my personality is just, I don't like to immediately react to things like this. That's just not who I am. And it's not something that I know that much about. I don't really know that much about geopolitics in the Middle East. I'm asking you questions tonight just to learn and get more perspective. So I guess if I'm trying to cobble together a question in this, it's what do you say to that person that says, well, why were we there in the first place? And the whole PNAC thing and Wesley Clark thing. But is that kind of a naive question? Is it kind of like, yeah, kid, well, if we were, it might be terrible and there was a lot of blood and treasure lost, but if we weren't there, then all of these other powers that are vying for these resources would have just slaughtered our interests because they would have all of these resources that we wouldn't have.
I don't know that answer. I dislike it because of how it sounds. It's kind of like, and I'm about to throw in a but the that answer, it's all like, it's the standard old neocon thing of, America's got to play this role to ensure the global order, this rules-based global order, and if there's a power vacuum.
You just did a video on isolationism, so maybe it speaks to that.
Well, it does, but I believe there are vacuums of power that would be created. I think it's a mix, right? But part of it is it's just reality. It's like the same kind of thing. I got crap from Brad, somebody who has a Twitter account, and like I asked him about some stuff, and he came down on me because I said this and said it was absurd. But to me, it seems a lot like the gun argument, right? We're going to back off. We're going to be isolationists. We're going to back off from this whole mess. We just want to be left alone. And it's kind of like the idea, if you disarm yourself, then the bad guys will treat you fine too, right? Take all the guns and there won't be any further problems because you just change the laws and everyone will obey, right? And I don't feel that will happen internationally. I'm sorry, I'm giving you a really screwy answer.
I gave you a rambling question. I'll just put it to you this simply. What do you say to the person who says to you, why were we there in the first place?
So the rich could get richer and the poor could get youngins. I mean, the main thing is people want to make money, and that's the proximate motivation, right? I think the moral dimension comes into play, but it's always sort of a limping second at best, right? I think once upon a time, we did have an idea that this area was going to be rebuilt and that we needed stability. So like, look what happened after World War II, right? You had the Marshall Plan. And believe it or not, it actually did work. It did rebuild Germany. I don't mean the plan did. The Germans themselves rebuilt Germany, not us, but we helped them, and it did work. Right? And
because they're Germans.
Pardon?
Because they're Germans.
Well, yeah. I mean, let's not get into the whole Gastarbeiter thing, but yes, the Germans did it with a little bit of help because their population had simply been truly destroyed. I mean, but I bring that up because it's an example. Sometimes in the past we have tried to get things to stabilize, and it does seem like there was some sort of more fundamental prudence that motivated our actions, and the result wasn't just self-serving garbage. So once upon a time, I think
the time that America and the West went into the Middle East on any shred of moral pretext, like we could
when we went and kicked the ass of the
people and bring
when we kicked the ass of the Barbary. You know about the Barbary pirates, right? Our first overseas naval engagement. Mm-hmm. We got tired of American ships being seized, and so we sent the Marines hulls of Tripoli, right? And we killed a bunch of Muslim slavers, and then we came home with a treasure and the satisfaction of having told them, "Don't do that anymore." I mean, I'm not saying that anything in the past was brilliant and beautiful, but in terms of something being morally, seeming to be correct and viable, going over because the slavers were attacking your shipping seems to be morally justified.
Yeah, but if they weren't attacking, I mean, there are atrocities going on every day, every minute in this world, and we selectively get involved in
absolutely. And it all happens to do with, who's owed a favor or who wants to make a buck or what seems most expedient for reasons B, C, and D as well as E. But we have gone.
Any government's motivated purely by these people are hurting and we can help them. That's what's pitched to the plebs. And I don't think that really even plays anymore.
Put your hand on your wallet and back up. But I guess my point, to make it quick, is that I think at times, while never altruistic, I think in some cases some of our policy interventions could at least be called enlightened self-interest. And at this point, I am hopeful that we're about to see some things get worked out and stabilized. I mean, it's much like when a king comes into power. I mean, I'm not saying Trump's a king, and I don't want a king. I'm an American. I'm not for the king thing, right? However, the classic issue when you have a monarchy is what kind of prince, comes into power. If you get a good one, it can be really, 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 really good. Far better, frankly, than most of the hidebound so-called, democracies or democratic republics and the rest. The problem is that if you get a bad one, and so in this case, I'm just going to remain hopeful. And I don't think it's because of any moral greatness on Trump's part. I think it's because of his ego and his skill. He wants to be remembered by history. Never discount the importance of that. And it would be simple vanity, and you could just sort of laugh it off if he had not thus far already established the crazy skills he has. Now, a lot of people will disagree and argue and say, "What are you talking about? He's crazy. He looks like a Cheeto, and he's vile. He's manipulated by these other groups."
Crazy.
And again, I'm not like I've never liked Trump before he went up for office, and I still find him in many personal respects kind of repugnant. But that will not allow me to overlook the clear skills he has. So I'm hopeful. I would say to the person who said that, if you want to raise individual points against me or the sort of picture I'm trying to paint, I'd be happy to address them. I would say, secondly, that I'm not really endorsing this. I'm just recognizing, it's like a friend of mine said to me once. He's like, you can go kicking and screaming, or you can go with style and panache, but you're going to go. Decision makers further up the food chain have already chosen that this is the immediate set of affairs. I don't like intervening in other countries this way. If this becomes the price to actually have a chance to get out, I'm all for it. But again, I address people individually as the case may be, and I realize that there are a lot of people who probably aren't on board with that, and that's fine too.
This could still be a roundabout way to ultimately exit.
Yeah, because we talked about this some in the isolation thing, and I discussed some of it on my own. it's at least possible. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, that it is at least possible that it might be necessary to take a few more aggressive actions in order to be able to create a balance of powers in the area that will permit withdrawing. Now, I'm not saying that's the right way. I'm not saying it's the only way. I'm saying at least imagine it's a possibility. And otherwise...
But I mean, we would never really withdraw. It would really just be we'd withdraw military, but we'd have business interests and
Absolutely, yeah.
more underhanded interests there.
And I think proxies and relationships.
All this, and then we're just going to be like, all right, hands off.
We're supposed to be in Libya right now because in order to support the problem with all the immigrants coming into Europe through Libya, the gaping bunghole, if you will, metaphorically speaking, of North Africa, right? The barrel opening that allows these population flows to go north. We're the ones who are supposed to be taking care of that, or NATO. Weirdly, NATO's nowhere to be seen there. We initiated it along with NATO, Obama and NATO, unleashed that nightmare on Europe. And yet we're not there right now. Weird. Take a look at Libya. It's really weird. In the West, you have the government and national unity.
Chalk that up to the Kalergi plan, and this is all just to destroy Europe and Western civilization.
Are you asking, am I one of those people?
No, I'm asking, what do you think of those people?
Well, I mean, it's self-evident that Europe has been overrun by non-white populations. So, and it didn't happen accidentally, and it costs enormous amounts of money to create the travel lines from Africa, and it takes China a great deal of trouble to go in and assist in moving those populations north. You recognize, of course, that China's all over sub-Saharan Africa, right?
Sub-Saharan, yes.
Yes, and many of these people heading north are from sub-Saharan Africa. So who perhaps is investing in helping them to go that way? I'm not blaming it all on China. Do not misunderstand me. They're just another one of the players involved in this. So I guess my answer is that clearly something's happening. And anyway, the point about Libya is that we're supposed to be there, but we're not. In the east, you have Haftar's group. In the west, you have the government of national unity. And on one side, one of these two competing groups right now that are getting backers, one set of them are the EU, the UN, and Italy. Go figure, right? And that's backed by the European powers. But then over on the other side, you've got Haftar, who's actually a U.S. intelligence asset. If you don't believe me, look at his Wikipedia page, and you can see that half his family still lives in Northern Virginia. And he's worked for the CIA for years. It's all on his Wikipedia page. But right now, he's being backed by France, by Russian mercenaries, and by Egypt. Haftar is a warlord who's on one side, and there's another group that doesn't have as much military power and as much of the oil wells that's on the other. Basically, it's a big mess. We're supposed to be there. If we wanted to stop it right now, we would be. Trump doesn't want to get involved with anything boots on the ground. And so to the point about stabilizing, being able to pull out and create a balance of power, look to Libya, because I think Trump's now doing that. You've got Russian mercenaries on one side, along with the French and the Egyptians backing Haftar. On the other side, you have the UN, you have Italy. What the hell are France and Italy on two different sides for? Like, that does not compute, right? They're all in the EU together, and yet they are. And I think it's to keep that open so more immigrants will pour over. But now Turkey has entered the mess. So I think I'm saying this because I got to keep this short, because we can look to that place to see how the need to deploy troops is going to be dealt with in future. And if in fact we stay out of it, if maybe, the Royal Navy is involved with some interdiction of migrants in the Mediterranean or something, but we don't have boots on the ground, and Libyan and Turkish partners have to handle that along with Egypt and the rest, and everybody gets a dole out of the opening markets of Eastern Mediterranean gas, then they can all get paid off, they can all be happy, and people can start to trade and make money. Hopefully that'll happen.
But the U.S. will still have a gaping hole at its southern border, and Europe will still have.
Oh, well, now wait a minute.
The world trying to come in.
Take a look at how much involvement there is with China and Iran in Latin America. I used to think it was just crazy. I used to think whenever I heard about like the combination of drug lords and terrorism and how it crossed over, and how the Senate had, the Congress had to pass laws in order to deal with the fact that terrorism and drug running had kind of overlapped ultimately. Now, if you look at the narco gangs and the rest, you've got human trafficking, you've got drugs, you've got terrorist relationships. And I heard about China and Iran being there. But I was recently up visiting some friends of mine in the DC area. And, I'm out having drinks with these guys. And some of them are from Bolivia. They're telling me about lithium and, the mines, and how, Chinese have come into Bolivia and it's pissed off a lot of the indigenous people. And I ask questions. I'm like, all this stuff that I hear, do you really have Chinese there? Do you really have Iranians operating in South America and stuff? And they're like, yeah. So when we talk about our southern border, the one thing I'm hoping for, I hope China, Iran, I hope, God, please do something stupid on the southern border that provides a pretext to lock all of that down. Please, please. Basically, I'm going to be proven to be a fool or to have been sensible within basically a year or so. After Trump gets reelected, it should be immediately apparent once he secures, if he does indeed secure a second term, if he doesn't actually do all the kinds of things that like the Ann Coulters and the rest want him to do, like I want him to do, like build the damn wall. If he does not do those things within, I'd say 6 months, maximum something like 8 months of his reelection, I'll shut down my channel and I'll be gone, because I will have been so completely taken for an idiot that I will have to just I'll have to hide.
We'll still want to talk to you.
I don't want to talk to myself. Sorry.
Well, I appreciate this education, and I hope everyone out there has, and to share this, because it is, if nothing else, it's a very different perspective, and it will balance out some of the other perspectives out there. Some of them smart, some of them a little hysterical, I think we have to say. So let's all just take a breath, take this all in, but factoring in Oliver's information, very important tonight. And I thank you. I learned a lot. It was very
hell yeah. And thank you, gentlemen, again. Happy New Year. It's been a while since we talked. It's great to see you both again.
Always.
It's great to see you, brother. And it's great to have everybody with us. Jared, do you have any final thoughts? And then I'll give mine. And
no, not much to say. We're going to have Daughter of Albion on tap on Thursday. Should be a fantastic show.
She's great, isn't she? Some of her content is just like, I didn't get a good snap there. Sorry.
Yeah, it's exactly. You snap your fingers. It's snappy, but it's smart. It's packed in with a lot. And we're going to have a great conversation with her. So that'll be Thursday.
Yeah.
As I said, don't have a time yet, but always check out the after party. Our Watch Live Now page has some upcoming shows, and of course our social media. And my site's thegreatorder.com. Has put a new cool artist up on the Beautiful Things page. If any of you appreciate aesthetics, so go.
Oh, the Faroe Island guy, illustrator. Yeah, I saw some of those. They're gorgeous.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it.
Fantastic. Well, fantastic, of course, appearing with the both of you again. And I think my final thoughts on what happened is just, if you want to know, folks, rewind to the beginning, as they used to say back in the old days. Rewind to the beginning. Listen to what I had to say there. I will add this, that I've been monitoring as we have been here tonight and looking for whether or not there's any other news to come out. And it appears that some outlets are reporting that there were no American casualties.
We're happy to hear that.
There is nothing official as of yet. And I think JK160 actually has it sagaciously here, writing, I think the missile attack will de-escalate the situation. Nobody was probably killed in this attack. Trump will ignore it. Iran shot the missiles to save face. Both will walk away happy. I think that's probably most likely where the best money could be placed at the moment. But the issue is, when you're dealing with brinkmanship, when you're dealing with all of these different players, not knowing what the other is doing, having to kind of guess at what's happening next, missiles fall where they're not meant to fall, and pressures come from places where they don't think or don't suspect or anticipate pressure to come from. Things can happen, but what is most likely here is that this was a move by the Iranians to be able to say, see, we are still your powerful leaders to the Iranian population, and we act on your behalf, and we have retaliated, and the Americans have suffered greatly for it, whatever they're going to end up reporting. I don't know, some number that I'm sure will placate the population and make them believe that they are the great defeater of the Satan, and yet not so much that the United States would have to retaliate because the claim that is broadly believed, whether true or not, is that the U.S. was so injured that they will likely never recover. But what are you all supposed to be doing? This is intriguing. It is stimulating to the mind. These things are fun to discuss. It's great to have somebody with the knowledge on the region like Oliver does to go over these things. You get a better idea about what's going on geopolitically. You get to know a little bit of better idea of who these players are. Of course, their motivations are in the real world, in the jungle, beyond the cradle that we build in Western civilization, this nursery room. It is the law of the jungle. It is fighting. It is warfare. It is fight and be killed, and fight and have victory. If you weren't able to exercise military might against another nation, you would not be allowed to do business there. They would just fleece your businesses. And so this is the reality of the world. It can be hard to appreciate. But what is it within your power to be able to do? What are the problems that are affecting you today, tomorrow, your brothers and sisters, your descendants in the very near future, children, grandchildren, and the like? And that is the white erasure taking place in Western civilization. You are not going to be able to influence these anti-whites who dominate these Western countries, these Western governments, these Western companies, and the like. But you can go free of the mean pathogens that you are infected with, and you can help those around you to also go free. This is a great example of what I was saying just this past Sunday when we were talking about briefly the event horizon for the anti-whites. There are things that can happen in our societal context that can radically shift that context in a way that benefits us, that opens up new opportunities for us. And we, if we are ready, can take advantage of those opportunities. If we sit around and lament that we don't have the power to influence these folks, or we challenge ourselves with questions I guess, like how we can take back the government. I guess that's the big one that everybody wants to ask. These things that are unanswerable for folks like us out in the real world. When we confront ourselves with such things, or when we put such things in front of us, we can only lament, we can only become depressed, we do not accomplish anything. And when those opportunities do arrive, we are in no state to take advantage of them. So do what we can do right now. Get down to business. This is potentially something exciting for us in the coming years. These sorts of things happening, these targeted assassinations, they give us an opportunity and opportunities to bring the message of going free to our brothers and sisters. And again, most importantly, we need to grow the number of our folks, to grow the pool of people who will contribute time, talent, and money to the service to white well-being, so that when those opportunities do present themselves, things we cannot forecast, we cannot even imagine, when they do present themselves, we are there with all of the might, all of the courage, all of the strength, all of the resources and intelligence that we need to move like lightning through those gaps and recapture our destiny. That is the marching orders. And let's get to it. It's been great seeing you all again. And I will see you all tomorrow, PWR, at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And then again with Jared George on Thursday on tap. We'll look for all of you wonderful people at that time. Bye-bye.